Buckle up, everybody, because we are diving headfirst into a world that's overflowing with political shakeups and some serious global power moves.
Yeah, it really does feel like one of those geopolitical thrillers,
Oh, totally.
where everything's happening in real time
Yeah.
and the stakes are incredibly high.
Well, let's kick things off in the U.S., where things are getting pretty interesting under Trump's second term.
Oh, yeah, things are definitely heating up over there.
Like, big time.
There are some cabinet picks that have everyone talking,
Yeah, Robert Kennedy Jr. for health secretary.
Right.
And then Tulsi Gabbard.
As director of national intelligence.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
definitely a big change from what we're used to.
Huge.
And it's going to be really interesting to see how those picks play out.
Totally. And it's not just about who's in the cabinet.
Right.
Trump is like shaking up entire agencies.
Yeah, he's not holding back.
The State Department, CIA, USAID, all getting a major overhaul.
I mean, some are even calling it a purge.
It's pretty intense.
All driven by Elon Musk's agency Dodge.
Which is basically investigating places like the FBI.
Exactly.
Causing a ton of officials to leave.
Yeah, mass exodus.
And some critics are even using the term internal coup.
Which is a pretty strong statement.
So what does that even mean in this context?
Well, it's like this idea that Trump is basically taking control of all these key parts of the government.
Right.
Getting rid of anyone who disagrees with him.
Oh, wow.
And concentrating power in a way that undermines the traditional checks and balances.
So is that actually what's happening, or is that just like a dramatic way to describe it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's definitely a controversial term, and whether it's accurate is still up for debate.
Okay, so let's talk about USAID for a second.
Sure.
Because its dismantling seems to be particularly controversial.
Right.
So what's the deal with that?
Well, USAID has always been a bit of a complicated organization.
How so?
It's been involved in both humanitarian aid and interventions that have led to regime changes. So it has a really mixed track record.
So the people who want to see it gone are basically saying it's become a tool for meddling.
Yeah, meddling in other countries' affairs.
And that it often causes more harm than good.
Exactly.
And they point to things like USAID spending $41 million trying to sway elections in Georgia.
Yeah, that was a pretty big deal.
Right, a lot of money for a country like Georgia.
Critics say that's a prime example of USAID overstepping its bounds and getting tangled up in political games.
Instead of just providing humanitarian help.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got all this drama unfolding in the U.S.
Right.
But how does it all connect to what's going on in the Middle East?
Well, U.S. internal politics always have a ripple effect on the world stage, especially in the Middle East.
For sure.
And right now, there's this tension between Trump and Netanyahu.
That seems to be pretty rocky.
Oh, yeah, it's been a roller coaster over the years.
And their disagreements about Iran and the recent conflict in Gaza definitely haven't helped.
Not at all.
And then there's Trump's idea to just relocate the entire population of Gaza.
Which has caused a major uproar.
Huge. It's hard to imagine how that would even be possible.
Yeah, the logistics alone seem insurmountable.
Totally.
And not to mention the Palestinians themselves are completely against it.
Right. So what's the motivation behind that kind of proposal?
Well, some analysts think it's a strategic move by Trump.
To help Netanyahu out.
Exactly, especially after his popularity took a hit during the Gaza conflict.
So by supporting Netanyahu's goal of controlling Gaza,
right,
Trump's trying to boost his allies' standing.
Precisely.
But doesn't that seem like a really risky move?
Oh, absolutely.
What about the impact on other countries in the region?
Yeah, like Saudi Arabia.
They've been pretty clear that they won't normalize relations with Israel until there's a Palestinian state.
Exactly.
So Trump's proposal basically throws a wrench in all of that.
It completely contradicts their stance and could alienate key players in the region.
Right. It's like messing with an already delicate balance of power. And it could embolden those who are against any compromise with Israel.
Definitely a lot of potential consequences there.
Okay, so we've got this potential powder keg in the Middle East.
Right.
But now let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about another leader who's making some bold moves.
All right.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yeah, his recent statements have been raising eyebrows.
To say the least, some even call him erratic.
And detached from reality.
Like his demand for nuclear weapons if Ukraine doesn't get into NATO.
That was a pretty shocking statement.
Yeah, the Kremlin called it madness.
And for good reason, it's incredibly provocative.
Right.
And it really plays into those fears that Zelensky is unpredictable.
And then there's his proposal to Russia about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant.
Oh, right. The one where he wants to give it back.
In exchange for them restarting gas transit.
And stopping the Ukrainian drone strikes.
Exactly. But is that even a realistic offer?
Well, it really highlights the disconnect between what Zelensky's saying and what's actually happening on the ground.
Okay. First of all, those drone strikes haven't really affected Russia's energy infrastructure.
Oh, so not much of a bargaining chip then?
Not really.
And second,
the Russians aren't showing any signs of giving up the Zaporizhia plant.
Which is super important to them strategically.
Exactly. So it seems like Zelensky's playing a risky game.
Yeah, trying to use leverage that doesn't really exist.
Right.
So what could this mean for the war?
Well, it could make things even more tense.
Right.
And it makes it less likely that they'll be able to negotiate peace.
So by making these unrealistic demands?
Yeah, and engaging in what some are calling nuclear brinkmanship.
Right.
He's pushing the conflict into dangerous territory.
Okay, so lots of high-stakes maneuvering going on there with some potentially disastrous outcomes.
Definitely.
Now, before we move on to our next topic,
okay,
let's talk about the Russian economy for a minute.
Right.
Because despite all these sanctions from the West, it's showing some surprising resilience.
It is.
Like defying all expectations.
Yeah.
Definitely not what a lot of people in the West were predicting.
So what's the story there?
Well, it seems like the idea of a collapsing Russian economy just doesn't match up with the data coming out of Moscow.
Really?
Yeah. Recent figures are actually pointing to an economic boom.
Wow.
Increased manufacturing output.
Okay.
A rise in car sales.
Okay.
And record high tax revenues.
So it doesn't sound like the sanctions had the impact everyone thought they would.
Not at all.
I mean, car sales in Russia went up by 9% in January.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, that's a good sign for their economy.
Definitely.
So what's fueling all of this?
Well, one key factor is that Russia has been able to shift away from Western markets.
Oh, right.
And establish new economic partnerships.
Like with China and India.
Exactly.
So they've found new customers for their stuff.
Exactly.
What else is helping them stay afloat?
Another crucial factor is their import substitution policies.
What does that mean?
They've ramped up domestic production of goods that they used to import from the West.
So they're relying less on foreign suppliers.
Exactly, becoming more self-sufficient.
Which is a smart move in times like these.
Absolutely.
Anything else contributing to their economic staying power?
Yeah, the Russian government has also been fiscally responsible.
Like how?
They've kept their public debt low.
Okay.
Which gives them more flexibility to deal with challenges.
Right.
And their central bank has also been working to stabilize the ruble.
So no currency collapse like some people predicted.
Exactly.
So it's like a mix of strategic planning, economic diversification, and financial discipline.
Exactly.
It sounds like Russia's not going down without a fight.
It seems that way.
And they've got the resources and the know-how to adapt.
Absolutely.
And this obviously has implications for the war in Ukraine and for the balance of power globally.
Oh, huge implications. We'll dive into those more in our next segment.
This is all incredibly fascinating.
It is.
But we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, there's so much more to uncover.
So stay tuned, because we'll be back with part 2 of our deep dive after a short break.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back. You know, before we get back to all the global events we've been talking about, it's important to remember that the things happening in places like Washington, Moscow, Jerusalem, Kyiv, they have consequences.
Yeah, they do.
That go way beyond, those centers of power.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in all the political strategy and the economic stuff.
Right.
But we can't forget that these things are happening in a very human context.
Exactly. Behind all the headlines and the maneuvering, there are actual people whose lives are being affected.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's go back to Russia's economy for a second.
Sure.
Because it's really doing better than anyone expected.
It is.
And that has big implications for the war in Ukraine and for the balance of power globally.
Yeah, it definitely challenges the narrative that's been coming out of the West.
Right.
Despite all those sanctions, the Russian economy isn't just surviving, it's actually showing strength in some areas.
So let's break down why that is what's helping them weather the storm.
Well, one big thing is that they've been able to move away from those Western markets.
Okay.
And build new partnerships.
Like with China and India.
Exactly. And those emerging markets give them a place to sell their exports.
So basically, they found new customers.
Yep.
What else is helping them navigate this tricky economic situation?
They've also done a good job with their import substitution policies.
What does that mean exactly?
So basically, they've ramped up production at home for things that they used to get from Western countries.
So they're less reliant on those foreign suppliers now.
Exactly. They're becoming more self-sufficient.
which makes a lot of sense these days.
It does.
Are there any other factors at play here?
Definitely. The Russian government has also been really careful with their spending, keeping public debt low, which gives them more flexibility to deal with any problems that come up.
That makes sense.
And their central bank has been working hard to keep the ruble stable.
So no currency collapse. So it sounds like it's a mix of strategic planning, diversifying their economic partners, and just being disciplined with their finances.
Precisely.
All of that together is what's making them so resilient.
Exactly. And it gives them more power on the world stage, makes them less vulnerable to pressure from the West.
So they can basically pursue their own interests more aggressively.
Exactly.
And what about the war in Ukraine? How does this economic strength affect that?
Well, it gives them the resources to keep fighting for a long time. They can afford to keep their military going.
Oh, wow.
Buy new equipment, and withstand the economic pressures of a long war.
So even though some people on the West might be hoping that sanctions will force Russia to negotiate, their economic resilience is actually giving them the ability to just dig in and keep fighting.
Exactly. They have this strategic patience, you could say, that lets them wait things out and possibly achieve their goals over a longer period of time.
We were talking earlier about Russia building these new partnerships with countries like China and India. How do those relationships change the global order?
Well, we're seeing the world become more multipolar, where power isn't concentrated in one place. It's spread out among several major players.
Got it.
And Russia getting closer to China, India, and other non-Western powers that directly challenges the U.S.-led system.
That's a big shift, isn't it?
It is. It's a shift that's been happening for a while.
Yeah.
But the war in Ukraine has really accelerated it.
I could see that.
It's kind of exposed the limitations of the current global order.
Yeah.
And now a lot of countries are rethinking their alliances and looking for different partners.
So we're seeing new economic blocs forming, regional powers on the rise, and basically a redistribution of global influence.
Exactly. It's a fascinating but definitely turbulent time to be watching all these global transformations unfold.
It really is. And while it's important to understand how the balance of power and these economic alliances are shifting, we can't forget about the human side of all of this.
Absolutely.
It's easy to get lost in the big picture, the geopolitics and economic trends. But we have to remember that these events have a real impact on people's lives.
Behind all the headlines and the sanctions and the power struggles, there are individuals whose lives have been completely changed by the decisions that leaders are making.
Their stories are a reminder that we're dealing with real people here, not just abstract concepts.
Exactly. Their lives and their futures are at stake.
Okay, so let's shift our focus back to the United States, where things with the second Trump administration are still developing.
Yeah, it's a story that just keeps on giving with all the twists and turns and power struggles.
And the potential to change not just America, but the whole world.
Absolutely.
The battle for control of the U.S. government is definitely not over.
It's far from over.
Both sides are really dug in.
They are.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
The outcome of this is going to have a huge impact.
On everything.
On American democracy. The country's role in the world. And the lives of so many people.
Both inside and outside the U.S.
Exactly.
And all the changes that Trump's put in motion, they faced a lot of pushback.
There's fierce resistance from people who see them as a threat.
To democracy.
To democratic norms and institutions.
Yeah, it's a real battle.
It is a battle for the future of the country.
And one of the most controversial things Trump's done is going after what he calls the deep state.
He says these career bureaucrats are working against him.
And he's trying to get rid of them.
He is.
But that's led to accusations of a witch hunt.
And it's definitely eroded trust in government institutions.
Yeah, critics are saying that Trump's prioritizing loyalty over competence. And creating this atmosphere of fear.
Where people are afraid to speak up.
Yeah, silencing dissent.
Exactly.
And it's not just a few individuals he's targeting. He's going after whole agencies.
He's claiming they're biased against him.
And against his vision for America.
Exactly.
So the State Department, the intelligence community, even the military, they've all felt the impact.
It's been a major shakeup.
Experienced people, diplomats, analysts, military officers, they've been pushed out.
Leaving a real gap in expertise.
And institutional memory.
Exactly.
It's a pretty dramatic reshaping of the U.S. government.
It is.
And it's caused a lot of strong reactions.
On both sides.
So what are the potential consequences of all of this?
Well, the consequences are huge.
Yeah.
And they're multifaceted.
Okay.
This loss of trust in institutions is really dangerous. It weakens the foundation of a democracy.
And when the most powerful country in the world is this messed up internally,
it creates uncertainty and instability all over the globe.
It's a reminder that these events aren't just some abstract political game.
No, they're not.
They have real consequences for real people. Their lives, their sense of security, their faith in the system. It's all affected.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift our attention back to the Middle East.
Right.
Where things are as complicated as ever.
It's a region that's always on edge.
Yeah. History, religion, geopolitics, it's all tangled up.
And it creates this really volatile mix.
Where even a small incident could set off a major conflict.
And with all the changes happening in the U.S.,
right,
things in the Middle East are even more unpredictable.
Let's talk about Trump and Netanyahu again.
Okay.
Their relationship has had its ups and downs.
It has.
But it seems like things might be getting worse.
It does seem that way.
Their disagreements over Iran and the Gaza conflict have really exposed some underlying tensions.
They have. Trump's not so keen on getting involved militarily in the region.
Yeah.
Which has frustrated Netanyahu.
Who sees Iran as a huge threat.
An existential threat.
And then Trump suggesting that they relocate the entire population of Gaza.
Yeah, that didn't go over well.
Not at all. It really damaged relationships with key Arab allies.
It did.
And put Netanyahu in a tough spot.
Both at home and international.
The proposal was widely criticized.
People called it unrealistic, impractical, and just lacking any kind of real plan.
It seemed like Trump was more worried about his own political image.
Right.
While Netanyahu was focused on Israel's security.
It shows that even strong alliances can be tested.
Yeah, when national interests clash.
Exactly. And in the Middle East, alliances can shift really quickly.
It's important to understand all the nuances of these relationships.
It is. Friends can become enemies, and enemies can find common ground.
It's all about strategy and what each country sees as its best interests.
Exactly.
It's a region where being practical is more important than ideology.
And survival depends on understanding how power is shifting.
And with all the changes happening in the U.S., the dynamics in the Middle East are even harder to predict.
Absolutely. The U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan, the focus on competition with other major powers, and the unpredictable nature of the Trump administration, it's all created a vacuum.
And different actors are trying to fill that vacuum.
Exactly.
It's like a high-stakes chess game where one wrong move could have disastrous consequences.
And we've seen how instability in the Middle East can affect the whole world.
Yeah, with energy markets, terrorism, humanitarian crises, it all gets impacted.
Absolutely. It's all connected.
Okay, so now let's move on to Europe.
Okay.
They're dealing with their own set of challenges.
Especially with the war in Ukraine dragging on.
Right. Europe's facing a real reckoning with its present vulnerabilities and its role in a changing world.
It's like they're at a crossroads.
Yeah, the war has shattered any illusion of peace and stability.
Right.
They have to face the fact that the world is a lot more dangerous and uncertain now.
It's a moment of truth for Europe, a time to reflect and figure out what to do next. The old ways of thinking are gone. Yeah. And they're scrambling to build new alliances as they deal with energy security, economic problems, and this resurgence of competition between major powers.
The war has really exposed how vulnerable Europe is strategically.
It has, especially their dependence on Russia for energy.
Right.
And it's shown weaknesses in their military and divisions among the member states about how to respond to Russia.
It's like a wake-up call.
It is.
And now European countries are rushing to find new sources of energy, bolster their defenses, and come up with a more unified foreign policy.
But it's not clear what the best way forward is.
Right? There are a lot of complexities and potential problems.
The war has also exposed the limitations of European integration.
How so?
It's been hard for them to agree on a unified response to the crisis in Ukraine.
It shows that the EU isn't one big happy family.
It's not.
It's a bunch of different countries with different histories, different worries about security, and different economic interests.
Exact.
And as the war goes on, those differences are probably going to become even more apparent.
The economic impact of the war is already being felt all over Europe.
Yeah, with rising energy prices, supply chain disruptions, and inflation.
It's hurting people's standard of living.
And causing social unrest.
And then you have all the refugees from Ukraine.
Right.
Putting even more strain on social services and infrastructure.
It's a real test of their compassion and their commitment to helping each other.
It is.
It's a difficult time for Europe.
It is.
They need strong leadership, creative solutions.
And a renewed commitment to peace, democracy, and human rights.
The war has put Europe in the spotlight.
And how they respond will have a huge impact on their future and on the future of the global order.
It's a reminder that we're all connected. What happens in one place affects everyone else.
Absolutely.
And as we try to navigate these uncertain times,
right,
it's more important than ever to try to understand each other, to talk to each other.
And to work together across borders and cultures.
To build a better future for everyone. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, exploring the political shakeups, the shifting alliances, and the economic currents that are shaping the world today.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. It's clear that we're living in a time of huge change and a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, it's like watching the whole global landscape shift, where the old rules don't apply anymore and the future is up in the air.
From the dramatic changes in the U.S. government under Trump's second term, to the rising tensions in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine, it's constant change.
It really is. But even though it can feel overwhelming, with all the complexity, we're not just watching this happen. We have a role to play in how things turn out.
So what can we do? How can we make a difference in a world that feels so chaotic and out of control?
Well, I think the first step is to stay informed.
Yeah.
Find reliable sources of information and have real conversations with people.
Right.
We can't just retreat into our own little bubbles and ignore what's going on.
We need to challenge ourselves to understand different perspectives.
Exactly. It's about being active participants in the conversation.
Asking questions.
Yeah, and challenging assumptions.
Especially in a time when there's so much misinformation and propaganda out there.
We can't afford to just passively consume information.
We need to think critically.
Learn how to separate fact from fiction.
And not just take everything we hear at face value.
And it's not just about staying informed.
Right.
We can also support organizations that are working for peace and justice.
Yeah.
Whether that's volunteering, donating, or just raising awareness.
We can all contribute to making the world a better place.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected.
Yeah.
And that the choices we make as individuals and as a society have a ripple effect.
So let's choose to act with courage, with compassion, and with a commitment to building a world where peace, justice, and human dignity are a reality.
It's a tough challenge.
It is.
But it's so important, and we have to keep working at it.
The world's watching.
And we need to act now.
This is the end of our deep dive.
It is.
But the conversation doesn't have to end here.
Right.
Keep exploring these issues. Talk to people and think about how you can make a difference.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about what's happening in the world, the better prepared we'll be to deal with the challenges and the opportunities that come our way.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for today, but be sure to subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
We're here to make things clear.